All right, welcome back for another Silhouette Studio tutorial. For the few of you that I talked about this video coming out yesterday, I apologize for the delay. I unfortunately had some computer issues to tackle, and as a result, I couldn't get to Silhouette Studio yesterday. So now that I have the computer problem solved, let's get back to it. For today's video, per quite a few requests, we're going to do some text manipulating this time around. We're going to cover how to space our letters and lines of text, how to do standard horizontal text as well as vertical text, both rotating and written down the page. Quite a few requests for that. We're going to do snapping text, again, another one with lots of requests. Things like curved text. So a big one there for lots of people. Also, we're going to do offsets on text. So that way we have, if this arrow was our text, we're going to have a shape match it and go around, which is good for things like cake toppers. And then very quickly, it'll apply to anything, but we'll do it with text as well, is just to make a simple stencil. That way, if you're doing any kind of sprayed project with spray paints or anything, or glass etching with the acid, such as the armor etch, then you can use this stencil method for projects like those. So let's jump right into it. We're going to be using our text tool here on the left, which is also the shortcut on your keyboard, T for text. So if you tap T, it will switch you to the text tool automatically. You just click where you want your text to go. You can put it wherever for the time being. We can always move it later. And let's just do this is text. Now we have already our cut lines established. So if you wanted to send this to the cutter as is, it looks terrible zoomed out, but if we zoom in, you can see they're nice, clean cut lines. So if you were just cutting text, you could send that to your cutter as is and be good to go. Again, for ease of visibility, I'm going to give it some color like I usually do. And let's start with the basic easy stuff first. On the right side here, we have our text style tab. And here's where you're going to have most of the control of your text. There's a couple of shortcuts up here as well. Depending on how you prefer to navigate, it might be easier for you here. You've got your font name, as well as the display of what they look like with the name. Same thing on this side here. The biggest difference is at the top of the page, it's just your alphabetical list, minus a couple of weird quirky ones I've noticed. Things like Courier and Times New Roman being at the top. As where this side we have our frequently used text, which aren't super accurate for me. I don't know why, because it defaults to one of the two. I forget. I believe it defaults to Arial, like it is right now. Times New Roman, I don't believe I've ever selected. This one happens to be one that I used very recently, so that one makes sense. So sometimes these are a little buggy in my experience. Then recently used is supposed to be the last three texts or three fonts that you selected, which again, mine's not always accurate. Another Day was the last one I used, but these two don't look right to me. And then you get your normal alphabetical list. So this all fonts section is exactly what you get up here. Arial, Courier, Times New Roman, and then alphabetical. Here you get Arial, Courier, Times New Roman, and alphabetical. So for some reason, the first three are a little quirky because they don't fit in with your alphabetical list. But you can do it here or at the top as long as you have text selected. That menu becomes available. Same thing with our kind of quick setting tools. We've got bold, italics, and underline, just like any other word processing program. We can select any combination of those, and they're also available here, as well as this drop down with some special forms. Keep in mind for Windows, or I'm assuming Mac as well. I haven't done Mac in quite a while, so don't quote me. But for your kind of pre-installed fonts, things like Arial and Times New Roman, you'll have control over things like bold, italicized, and underline. With a lot of these custom-made fonts, be it purchased or free from things like DaFont, these will be grayed out. So if I choose one of these, you'll see I can no longer select bold or italicized at the top or in the menu. Underline is available, from what I can tell, in every font, but generally I don't like it because, as you can see here, it's just a single line, which if we're sending this to a cutter, isn't going to do anything. It's just going to slice our vinyl or our paper. There's nothing to like weed or pick up. So this would in essence be unusable as an underline. I would use like a simple box and create whatever width, thickness, whatever you want for an underline. If you wanted a narrow one, you could make it narrow. If you wanted a more aggressive underline, and then you could choose a color. So if you're going to do underline, I've had bad experiences with the underline option. As you can see with this text, it just doesn't work. It's just a straight line. Some of them work a little better. I think Arial works. Yeah, Arial gives you a little bar, but again, you can't choose the width or the thickness. If you wanted this to be just a little bit wider or narrower than the text, you can't. But with the rectangle tool, you very easily could create something just a little bit longer and a little bit wider and get a more custom look, something to that extent. So it depends on what you want, but generally I stay away from the built-in underline. From there, that's enough on that. We've got our position, or I don't know what you call it, the actual terminology, but the position of the text within the text box, which with a line of text like this, you'll see no difference because it's fit to the box. And again, that's available at the top in this drop-down menu or on the side here. But if we were to push enter so we get two lines of text, then it's obviously much more noticeable. Right now they're justified to the left of the box, centered, right justified, and then I'm never really entirely sure what this one does. So I tend to go centered for most projects, be it a card or something that I'm cutting with vinyl. If I have multiple lines, generally I'd want something more to this extent, or if we added a line, again, we're still centered and getting a cleaner look than, say, if we were to cut this like so. If you're doing it with transfer tape, generally you're not going to want it left justified like this. So most projects I'll do centered, but obviously it's going to vary by your project. But yeah, so this drop down here at the top is an option as well. Kind of the last thing of importance in this menu is the line spacing and character spacing here towards the bottom. The line spacing only applies if we have more than one line of text. So right here we have 3. And when you move our slider or tap up and down on your little toggle here, you'll see that the spacing between the lines of text is increased or decreased. You can enter a custom number if you wanted something very precise like 102. Otherwise, your movements up and down both on the slider and the arrows, they go up and down by 5%. So 100% being the default for that font. The character spacing, the same thing, just the distance between each individual text character. So you can get them closer together or again further apart, depending on the look that you're going for. And for people who have upgraded versions of the Silhouette software, I believe all of them, Designer, Designer Plus, and Business, you add the Glyph menu here. Like we said with the bold, italicized, and the drop-down menu, this depends on the font. So with one like, what's a good example? Another Day has a couple of glyph options. And so if you see pictures of fonts generally paid, but there are some free fonts. This one actually, Another Day, I got, it was a free download, I believe from DaFont, if I'm not mistaken. I've downloaded hundreds of fonts at this point, so I'm 90% positive that's where it came from if you want to take a look at this font. But you can see these are all the different characters that are available with this font using the glyphs. And so here are some special ones generally for the start of a word. So they're all capital letters with this little tail or whatever the proper term for this would be. So if this is text, we wanted this first T to look more like a fancy intro or maybe on like a greeting card of some kind. We could go into our text. I'm going to delete the regular T and apply this glyph T. And you'll see that now we have that little decorative tail and the T. And you can do this with any letter or any character that is supported with the font. It's going to, again, depend on the font. This one being Another Day version 2. These are the glyphs that are offered with this font. So we could also add a custom ending if we want. You can put these in the middle. They just generally don't look good. But if we replace like the I with this tail, you're going to get a weird tail between the I and the S. Let's do it just so we can see. It's not a pretty look, but then you'll know exactly what this will do. So it's not generally a desirable look, but it might be for your project. So anything here you can choose. They'll be in alphabetical order. And all the ones I've seen, they're split. So it's alphabetical order for the capital letters, then alphabetical order for the lowercase letters, and then they'll have special characters below that. So you'll see that it gets, there's a couple weird quirks here. We've got this one going backwards, E, D, C, B, A. Usually they go alphabetical order. This one seems to be backwards this time, but that's all right. They're still available. So again, we could do like our S being at the end and choose a good ending if you wanted, like the little heart on the end. Let's get rid of this kind of awkward I. Let's put our I back in, and we'll end the row with a nice custom S. All right, that's enough. You get the idea with the glyphs. Like I said, generally a lot of the free fonts that I have tried don't have glyph support. It'll have some of the special characters like the 1/2 character, 1/2, or possibly like the degrees logo, things like that. Very little customization. This one has a lot more options than I've seen on most of the free ones, but always take a look at your glyphs there. That's enough kind of in this menu now. The glyphs are covered. This one's just your spell check. So if you make a typo, it will tell you here what it thinks you want instead. So let's start manipulating now. So we have our font here, and a couple things we can do right off the bat. The first one, I'm going to space it just a little bit using that character spacing we just learned about, because it's kind of cluttered looking at the moment. I'm going to pick something that looks a little nicer. It doesn't really matter for this video, but I kind of like this little link going on here between the T and the H. And let's start with doing the vertical text that I've seen this asked quite a few times. I believe I covered it in the first video covering all of the tools, but in case you didn't see that video or didn't see that part of the video, because it is quite long and I do apologize for that. It's a lot to take in. You can do this a couple of ways. First, if we just want it written the other way, we can just take it and rotate it. If you are wanting it written vertically in this fashion, and if you hold shift, as it says below my cursor there, I'm holding shift on my keyboard, it'll snap in 45-degree increments. So I got 45, the starting position in this case, 45 the other direction, and 90 degrees. So you can rotate, and you can go all the way around. It'll again snap in 45s, or if you don't want it in a 45 measurement, just let go of shift and you have full control to fine tune. So if you want vertical in this fashion, then yeah, you can just rotate it, or you can choose this little A on its side and it will rotate at 90 degrees for you. I generally like to rotate it myself, but it's a quick button there if you like. As far as normally people are asking, they want vertical written THIS going this way. And there's a couple ways you can do that. The way that I usually do, because it's fast and easy, is just to double click your text. That way you can edit it, and it brings up this blue bar here on the side. Just click it and drag it back. And it changes the size of your text box. And if you just drag it to the smallest point, as far as it'll let you go, it will make the text vertical. Granted, it's kind of ugly at the moment with the special glyphs, but again, we could go up and we could try to make it look a little cleaner. And you can see in this one, these two letters are too small, that they don't fit. The box can't go any smaller. So you can do one of two things. You can either click in here and add a space, and it'll push the X to the next line, but sometimes it adds an extra line of text, and so now we have kind of a weird gap. So the other thing that you can do is to do your character spacing and just space them further apart. That way the E and the X are moved further from one another. And now you'll see that the spacing for each word is consistent with the space in between. So obviously if you have a less kind of clunky looking text, testing. Oops, if I could spell, that would be great. So if we do this one, for example, we'll give it a different color. And we can double click and bring our box in. This is a good one too, because we have a couple thin letters with an I and the T. So I usually just go to the character spacing and just move them a little bit further apart until they're all on their own line. There we go. And then again, now it's left justified. We could go here or over here and choose centered if we wanted just a clean. I see a lot of like wooden vertical signs. People put it like the front doors. This is a good way to make text for something like that. All right, from there, let's move on again. I think we're going to do the offsets next. We'll save the curves and shapes and things for last. I think it's the most exciting one. I use it quite a bit. And the offsets are fairly easy, so not too overwhelming. So I talked about it in a previous video, but this little offset button here, this star, gives us a couple of choices. We've got an offset, which will go to the outside of whatever you have selected, or an internal offset, which would go inside of that. With a text like this, I'm going to do an offset, so it goes to the outside, and you'll see it's put a cut line. This isn't set yet. We're still able to customize it before we apply. So here you choose how much distance or how far you want the offset from, in this case, your text, but it could be a rectangle, it could be an entire image, whatever it is you're working on. So this is the distance from whatever your selection is that you want the offset. The part that seems to confuse some people is that when you get it to something like this looks like it's going to make some weird cut lines. We're setting an offset of this text, so when we submit or apply this, what you're going to get is the outside line. You won't get all this jumbled cuts through the middle. So what we're looking for is that outside edge to look the way that we want. Maybe we want it to be fairly close so that the characters just link in the offset. They're pretty tight together. Maybe something like that. And then you can choose the squared corners, which something like a T is going to make a difference. You've got the squared corners. You can see it on the E as well, where it comes to the point there. The points on the S. So to me, this is kind of ugly looking, so I'm going to go with the rounded corners. Some text or some images, the square corners look much better. This one, to me, it does not. And we can apply. And you'll see all those little middle cut lines have gone away. And this is now a solid piece if we give it some color so it can be seen. It's just a solid piece based off of that text. And we could do it again. If we did an offset, we could go to the outside and add one around it. Or we could do an internal offset, which right now looks like it's done nothing because it keeps the last settings that you used. So we did an offset of 0.35 inches. Now we're doing an internal of 0.35. So this is now exactly on our text. So if we want to do a lesser amount, that way it met in the middle and added a second layer, maybe do something like 0.15. And you can now see, it's hard to see because I picked red, but you can see this new cut line, which again I haven't yet applied, but is just between the text and that outside line that we made just a moment ago. And so if we like the way that it looks, which I don't really, but for a tutorial it's good enough, we can apply it. And again, we could apply a color to that if we liked. So this is now, it looks like, because I picked white, that it's just the page showing through, but this is now its own layer that we have added. And you could group the three together like we learned in a couple previous videos if you wanted. And now if I try to move it, I can't accidentally move the white or the red layer separately. It's now all grouped together. And this can be handy for quite a few projects as far as the offset. This could be something like a cake topper. And you could have the red be like a background piece and then add your foam tape so the white layer is in front of the red. And then you could possibly do like foam tape or something again and offset the green letters to be out in front even again. So this is very common for stuff like that. I also use it a lot for cutting stickers and different designs. So having just a nice offset around your shape. Right. And let's get into that, what most people have been asking me about, which is shaping your text to a design. Most commonly, I get requests for rounded text, but designs in general, it works as well. I'm going to write curved because we're going to do curved text. Of course, you can do it with any text that you want. It doesn't have to say curved, of course. So you'll see when we're in the edit option where we can change our letters, you've got the blue bar we played with a moment ago, and we have this little, I always call it a compass, but it's not really, so that we can move. If you're not in the edit mode, you can just move it like anything else in Silhouette Studio. But once you're in here, if you try to move, you're selecting just like a Word document. So you can't move it in this box unless you use this little, we're going to call it a compass. That's important for our shaping of text. So let's say we want kind of a rainbow shape of text. You have to give Silhouette Studio, an idea of what it is you want it to do. There isn't like some of the older Word options where you could just choose curved text. You're going to give it a line or a shape to follow. It can be any shape or line that you want. Maybe I want a fairly steep kind of rainbowed shape. So maybe something like this. And then we double click our text to get into the edit where we get our little compass back. And if you drag your text by this compass to the line, you'll see it snaps to the line, and what was a red cut line has turned gray. So now it is no longer a cut line. Now it is data telling this text what shape to be in. And we can move that anywhere on here that we want. And if you also pull it into your shape, you can snap it on the inside, but insides are kind of picky. There it goes. Where sometimes it'll pass through. So you might have to go back and forth a couple of times to get it to snap on the inside. The outside, I have very little trouble getting it to snap exactly as I would. But if, say, I wanted it on the inside, there it goes. So maybe I want it on the bottom down here like this. It can be a little bit of a pain to get to the inside. And then once we get to this point, we have a few options. You'll see now this little bar, this little slider has come up. And what that does is if you click the little piece in the middle, you can move it either way from the original point that it was placed. So note, the text doesn't have to actually be on the line. It just uses the line to determine the shape. So we can space it off of the line. In the middle is where we started, and then you can move it further and further up. Obviously, in a case like this, that's unreadable garbage. So with a project like this with such a tight curve, obviously you wouldn't want it this far in. But you can change your position on the shape. And that works regardless whether it's on the inside or the outside. You've got this option to drag it around. And this works, like I said, regardless of what the shape or the project is. If we pick something like this, choose our font and grab that little compass again, it'll snap to anything in the software, which is handy and very strange because obviously this would be a mess to try to do anything with. But again, you can snap to the inside or the outside of the shape, which does various things depending on your shape, this one being pretty much unusable. So that is a very sought after thing. Just keep in mind that if you drag it across and it's not doing anything, you need to double click and use that little compass to lock it into place. And if you go to the send panel, you'll see this is not a cut line. It is just a reference for your text. If you don't like the gray line being here and you're confident with where your text is placed, maybe I know for a fact I want it right there, I can right click and choose to convert to path. And now this text is its own thing. It's now released the oval, so if we didn't want that at all, we could just click delete. And this is now permanently curved, can be manipulated as you would anything else in the software. And it is its own kind of image at this point. If you wanted to further customize it, you could again right-click and ungroup it. And now each letter is its own thing, still with that curved shape to the letter. So depending on your project, you may have an option or an interest in releasing the path so that they are no longer connected, but I'm going to undo it so they're all one piece. You could always just select it all and choose group again if you ungrouped by accident, or just undo. So that is a very common thing I get asked. And again, you can do it with anything. So if you wanted to make a custom line, if you want like a little curve to your text, something like that. Let's get it to where it ends nicely and hit enter and escape. So if we want something like that, we could again take text. We'll just do hello. Maybe we'll pick a more interesting font to look at. That's a little fancier. It's not super crazy. Easy to read. Give it some color. Let's go a nice blue color. And the same thing. You can drag it down and you can snap it to your own custom design, shape, line, whatnot. And then you'll see if you go off the end of the piece, it will continue back. It will continue whatever shape you're locked to. So in a case like this, obviously that wouldn't be desirable, but it's good to know that, again, depending on your project, you may have a reason for it to wrap around, especially on things like circles. If you're getting like a saying to go around the outside, it's going to be a continuous path. All right. And then again, if you wanted to set this permanently and get rid of the gray line, you could right click, convert it to the path, and now this is unnecessary and we could just delete it. And then the last thing I said we would learn is making a stencil, which again, this can apply to anything that you're working on, but we'll do it with text in this video. And let's just write stencil, just because it's relevant. Again, we'll give it a more interesting, there it goes, more interesting font to look at. There's something interesting. And let's make it a nice color. What color should we do? Let's give it this pastel blue color. So, Tiffany blue color. Zoom in so we can see it a little. And you'll see here with this font, we have some overlaps, which is important if you're cutting, because you'll see that these cut lines overlap. And so if we were to send this to the cutter, which is zoomed back out, let's get back in here. There we go. You'll see when it cuts the T, it's going to cut the outside of this T here, and then it's going to cut the E, which is going to overlap. So you're going to have this little piece in the middle is going to be loose that normally you wouldn't want. So we've got one of two options. We can click it and choose cut edge here on the side. So that'll only cut the edge of your piece. And you can see now the inner line is faint. It's not going to be cut. Same with the one into the E, or into the N, sorry. The one into the C, the I, and the L. They're all faint and won't be cut. Versus choosing cut, and you can obviously see the overlaps. So you can do cut edge, and that will set it the way that you would normally want, where you're just cutting the letters. I like to, however, take my design once I have it the way that I like, maybe just like this, and do your weld option here at the top. That will do anything that overlaps and connect them. So now you'll see all of this is connected because they were all overlapping. And so the two that didn't touch the dot on the I and the S aren't connected to our font. So they are their own separate pieces. But you could select all and group if you were worried about moving them. And this way, if you send it to your cutter, you don't get any bad cuts or unnecessary cuts either way. And you've got your finished shape or your finished text, which we can now make a stencil from. So generally the easiest way to do a stencil is that you would just have some kind of rectangle or square around your text or your image. I'm going to give it color so it's easy to see. And right now it's on top, so we can move it to the back right here. That way it's behind our word. We kind of want it roughly in the middle, but it doesn't have to be perfect. You can use the positioning tools and make it perfect if you want, but the important thing with a stencil is that we just have enough around our image or our font. That way, if you're doing, painting it with a brush, or you're coming across with an airbrush or a rattle can, that you're not getting your paint or your material out here where you don't want it. So it doesn't have to be perfectly centered, but at least enough coverage to not ruin your project. And then what I like to do is to just drag and select both our image, or in this case our text, as well as what we're going to use as a mask for our stencil. And then you can do it at the top of the page, or I like to do it on the side here, is select this little icon. This is our Modify tab. And here you'll see Subtract. And Subtract takes whatever's on top and kind of cuts it out of whatever is in the back. So stencil being on top, if we choose Subtract, it will cut. And you can see this is an important thing with the E, is it cuts it out of our background color and leaves us, in this case, a loose little E piece. There we go. Put it back to where it was. For making a stencil. So this is now all cut out. If you send this to your cutter from the send, you'll see this is all going to cut as is. And if you had something like vinyl being cut, then you could stick this piece down and paint around it. So you'd want to make sure to use your transfer tape to hold that piece in its correct location, or be careful to place it separately later. So yeah, this will allow you to make a stencil And again, you can do it with anything. You could do a smiley face or a complicated design. Like I've seen a lot of interesting hearts and things for wedding designs and stuff. You could do all of that kind of thing the exact same way. And if we undo, you could even customize a little bit if you would like. There we go. If we ungroup this for a second, maybe we want to get rid of the eye little dot. Let's delete that. Maybe we want to personalize it just a little bit. I thought there was a heart in here. There. Maybe we want to put a little heart on the eye. Make it the same color, which is right there. And you could do something like this. Everything else looks kind of italicized, so I'm going to rotate it a little bit. Kind of get that into position, maybe something like that. And then again, we could select all of it. We could choose our little icon here for modify and subtract the top layer from the lower layer. Now you see we've now personalized that text just a little bit. And again, minus the little dot on the E, this is now all connected as a stencil. And then you'd have to line this little piece up after the fact. But that gives you a stencil that you could then, and you can see it's cut out. Oops, it's not on top. Move it to the top so we can see it. That it's now transparent, so that way it can be sprayed or used in a stencil form. So with that, I think that concludes the video. If you have any further questions on text, I may have forgotten something, let me know. Otherwise, I think this covers all the questions that I have been asked, most specifically the vertical text, curving or shaping text to different things. And then there's been some requests for stencils, and I thought this was a good video to include that, since a lot of stencil work that I've seen recently has been of text. So anyway, I appreciate you checking out the video. Hopefully it was helpful to you in one way or another. Any new subscribes or likes would be appreciated. And again, any questions, concerns, comments, let me know down below, and we'll get them answered and solved for you. Until next time, enjoy crafting.